The first thing his mother did was smile at me like I had already lost something and just did not know it yet. It was not cruel. That would have been easier. It was gentle, practiced, and full of a kind of sympathy that assumes weakness before it ever asks a question. She tilted her head, looked me up and down, and said she was so glad her son had found someone sweet. Not capable, not impressive, sweet. Then she reached for my coat as if I might not understand where to put it, and I realized in that moment that this dinner was not about meeting me, it was about placing me. My fiancé stood right beside me and said nothing. That silence was my first lesson. My name is Maribel Cross. I remember it clearly because it was the first time I heard my own name used less than anyone else's in the room. We were seated at a long dining table that looked like it had been polished for generations, the kind of table that carries inheritance in its grain. His father sat at the head, his mother at the opposite end, and the rest of the family arranged themselves like a quiet jury. I was placed next to my fiancé, close enough to be seen, but not close enough to be addressed. They asked him where we planned to live. They asked him how long he expected to support us. They asked him whether he felt ready for that responsibility. Responsibility, as if I were a line item. I was sitting right there. His mother spoke slowly when she addressed me, each word softened and stretched like I might miss the meaning if she moved too fast. She asked if I was nervous about marriage. She asked if I had ever lived on my own. She asked if I planned to work, and when I said yes, she smiled again and said it was nice that I wanted to try. His father did not look at me when he spoke about finances. He looked at his son and asked whether he had considered protecting himself. That was the word he used. Protecting. I noticed my fiancé straighten slightly at that, his shoulders lifting like the compliment landed exactly where he wanted it to. He nodded and said he had things under control. I watched him accept their approval like it was currency. No one asked me what I had under control. The wine was poured for me last, not forgotten, just delayed. His sister asked my fiancé how we met, and he told the story like I was an accessory to the plot instead of half of it. When I laughed at the right moments, his mother looked relieved, like I was performing correctly. I could feel the outline of their assumptions pressing in around me. No savings, no plan, no leverage. Someone who would be grateful to be chosen. I let it happen, not because I was afraid to correct them, but because I wanted to see how far they would go once they believed the story they were telling themselves. There is something revealing about the way people behave when they think you need them. Their generosity becomes conditional. Their kindness grows instructions. Their concern turns into control. At one point, his mother reached across the table and patted my hand. She told me I did not need to worry because their family took care of their own. She said it like a promise and a warning at the same time. I thanked her. My fiancé squeezed my knee under the table, not in support, but in reassurance to himself. I could feel it. The confidence of someone who believes he is holding the stronger position. Dessert arrived, and with it, advice I did not ask for. Budgeting tips, suggestions about modest ceremonies, comments about how simple beginnings build character. Each sentence assumed I would be receiving, not contributing. I watched their faces as they spoke, relaxed and comfortable in their conclusions. No one questioned whether they were right. I smiled, I nodded, I stayed quiet. Curiosity is a powerful thing when paired with patience. When we left that night, his mother hugged me tightly and whispered that everything would work out as long as I trusted her son. My fiancé smiled proudly, like he had passed a test. In the car, he told me his family just wanted what was best for us. He did not ask how I felt. He did not need to. He believed he already knew. As I looked out the window, I made myself a promise. If they wanted to believe I had nothing, I would let them. After that first dinner, something shifted, not loudly, not in a way I could point to and protest, but quietly, like furniture being moved an inch at a time until you trip over it in the dark. His family stopped asking questions altogether and started making plans. They spoke about our future like it was a group project, and I was the part that needed supervision. It was not hostility, it was certainty, the kind that settles in when people believe they understand your limits. At brunch the following Sunday, his mother brought a folder, a real one, thick and beige, the kind people use when they want to feel organized and authoritative at the same time. She slid it across the table toward my fiancé, not me, and said she had taken the liberty of drafting a starter budget. Starter, as if my life was a training exercise. She talked through line items slowly, explaining sacrifices I should be prepared to make, apartments I should be willing to accept, comforts I should not expect. I nodded politely while stirring my coffee, listening to my future reduced to a spreadsheet I had never asked for. His father cleared his throat and mentioned a prenuptial agreement. He said it gently, like a favor. Protection, he called it again. For my fiancé, of course. Everyone laughed lightly, like this was practical wisdom being passed down, not a warning about where they believed power belonged. I noticed how naturally the conversation flowed around me, how no one waited for my reaction. They already had it imagined, grateful, relieved, lucky. My fiancé absorbed all of this, like it confirmed something he had been trying to articulate to himself. On the drive home, he repeated their language almost word for word. He talked about responsibility and realism, about how someone needed to be the planner. He said he did not mind taking that role. He said it like a gift. When I asked where I fit into these plans, he smiled and said I did not need to stress about details. He had it handled. That was new. He started making decisions without looping me in. Small things at first. Which venue tours to cancel, which guest list options were unrealistic, which expenses were unnecessary. Each choice was framed as efficiency, but together they formed a pattern. My input became optional. My agreement became assumed. When I hesitated, he would gently remind me that his family had experience, that they were only trying to help us start strong. Start strong meant start quiet, apparently. What he did not know, what no one in that family knew, was that money had never been emotional to me. It was not dramatic or indulgent or symbolic. It was methodical. It was something I had learned early to respect, to track, to keep boring and stable. There was no single moment that taught me that lesson. It was more like background noise, a discipline built from years of watching people confuse comfort with security. I carried that history the way some people carry muscle memory. It did not announce itself. It just worked, so I let them think I needed guidance. I let his mother send me articles about budgeting for beginners. I let his sister offer advice about finding affordable hobbies. I let his father talk about the importance of marrying up in ambition, not assets, while looking directly at his son. Each comment pressed a little harder, testing whether I would shrink or resist. I did neither. I stayed pleasant. I stayed agreeable. I stayed quiet enough to be underestimated. The thing about being underestimated is that people stop editing themselves around you. They speak freely. They reveal priorities. They show you exactly how they intend to treat you once the paperwork is signed. One evening, his mother invited me for coffee alone. She said she wanted to bond. She talked about marriage as if it were a series of trade-offs I should be thankful to accept. She offered to help me manage my future, her words, not mine. Help me adjust expectations, help me understand my role, help me feel secure. I smiled across the table, wrapped my hands around the warm mug, and thanked her for her concern. Inside, something clicked into place, precise and calm. Not anger, not fear, clarity. They believed I needed them, and because of that, they were already showing me everything I needed to know. Once the ring was on my finger, the tone changed again. Engagements, I learned, are contracts long before they become celebrations. The champagne and smiles were just packaging. Underneath, everything hardened. Decisions became binding. Opinions became policy. His parents stepped fully into authority, citing experience and generosity as justification. They insisted on handling deposits, vendors, and contracts because, as my fiancé explained more than once, I was not in a position to contribute financially. He said it casually, like a fact everyone already agreed on. No one looked at me when he said it. No one waited for my correction. I watched my name disappear in real time. Emails went out without me copied. Meetings were scheduled when I was unavailable, then summarized afterward as if my presence would not have changed anything. His mother took possession of a binder that held every receipt, agreement, and confirmation. She carried it like a ledger of power. When I asked about a venue choice, she told me not to worry about the details. When I asked about a contract term, my fiancé kissed my forehead and said he had it handled. Handled meant decided. Wedding planning is supposed to feel like collaboration. Ours felt like compliance training. I was guided toward preferences instead of asked about them. I was thanked for flexibility I had not offered. Every time I hesitated, I was reminded how fortunate I was to have a family willing to step in. The word help came up often, so did sacrifice. They spoke about money as if it were fragile and finite. something that had to be protected from mistakes like me. That assumption became my cover. While they debated color palettes and guest counts, I paid attention to paperwork. I noticed which contracts were signed in haste and which were not reviewed closely. I noticed how comfortable they were when they believed control was uncontested. Quietly, without mentioning it to anyone, I learned which documents mattered more than flowers ever would. At night, after my fiancé fell asleep, I reviewed copies of agreements he left on the kitchen counter. I read every line, not looking for drama, just structure. Ownership, responsibility, exit language. I was not planning an escape. I was studying the architecture of commitment. There is a difference. One is emotional, the other is procedural. People confuse them because they want to believe love overrides logistics. It does not. As the wedding approached, expectations solidified. His parents spoke with increasing confidence about the future, about roles and responsibilities already assigned. They talked about managing finances together, meaning them and their son. They talked about allowances and protections, about making sure everything was fair. Fair, in their vocabulary, meant unequal but justified. I nodded along, absorbing tone and intent. No one suspected I was listening for anything other than reassurance. The closer we got, the less they checked with me. That was the tell. The final agreement was presented during a casual afternoon meeting at his parents' house. It was framed as a formality, a way to simplify things before the big day. His mother placed the document in front of my fiancé, walked him through the summary, and explained how it protected everyone involved. She did not turn it toward me. My fiancé glanced at me briefly, then back at the page. He said it was standard. He said it was nothing to worry about. I asked one question, carefully chosen, mild enough not to alarm anyone. His father answered it for me. My fiancé squeezed my hand, a signal meant to soothe, not silence. I let it work. They slid the pen across the table to him. He signed without hesitation. No one asked if I had concerns. No one offered to explain it to me directly. No one imagined I might object or even understand the implications. I watched the ink dry, feeling the weight of the moment settle in my chest. Not dread, not regret, confirmation. They had just locked in a belief they would not revisit until it was too late. In the final weeks before the wedding, the tone shifted from polite oversight to something sharper. Condescension no longer bothered to dress itself up. His parents began speaking openly about contingencies, about what would happen if things did not work out the way they hoped. If I struggled, if I failed to adjust, if I could not keep up. They said these things in my presence, calmly, as if discussing weather patterns. My fiancé reassured them with a confidence that would have been touching if it were not so revealing. He told them he had protected himself. He told them everything was handled. I sat there and listened, invisible by design. They assumed my silence was confusion or gratitude. It never occurred to them that it might be strategy. Underestimation has a way of turning people careless. They stopped lowering their voices around me. They stopped filtering their concerns. I heard what they thought of me when they believed I did not have the power to respond. I learned exactly how disposable they believed I was. Behind the scenes, nothing was left to chance. Everything that mattered had already been reviewed, clarified, and set in motion. I moved through those weeks with a calm that surprised even me. There was no scrambling, no second guessing. I knew where every document lived, who had copies, and what each signature meant. I had asked my questions early, quietly, when curiosity did not look like resistance. I had taken notes while everyone else was celebrating. My fiancé mistook my composure for dependence. He liked feeling essential. It made him taller somehow. When he talked about our future, he spoke as if he were carrying me toward it. He did not notice that I was walking beside him, counting steps. When his mother reminded him again to be careful, he smiled and told her he had everything under control. He did not look at me when he said it. I let him keep that belief. As the wedding drew closer, the narrative around me solidified. I was framed as delicate, lucky, someone who would need guidance long after vows were exchanged. His sister joked about teaching me how to manage expectations. His mother spoke about easing me into responsibilities. Their kindness had edges now, thin and unmistakable. I smiled through it all, playing the part they had written for me because it served me better than the truth ever could. The night before the ceremony was quiet, too quiet for nerves. I sat alone in the hotel room, my dress hanging untouched, shoes placed neatly by the door. Outside, the city hummed with normal life, unaware that a private reckoning was about to take place. I did not feel fear. I did not feel doubt. What I felt was clarity, the kind that settles in when you have done your work and there is nothing left to adjust. I thought about the first dinner, the pitying smile, the assumptions layered one on top of another until they became certainty. I thought about how easily people accept a story that flatters their sense of control, how rarely they question it when it places them above someone else. They had believed I was unprepared because they needed me to be. I slept soundly. In the morning, the venue buzzed with activity, florists moved quickly, family members offered instructions. His mother barely acknowledged me as she coordinated details that no longer concerned her. My fiancé kissed my cheek and told me everything looked perfect. He meant the setup. He meant the illusion. I nodded and thanked him. When it was time to walk inside, I paused for a moment at the entrance. The doors were tall and heavy, polished to a shine that reflected the version of me they thought they knew. Someone fragile, someone dependent, someone grateful just to be there. I adjusted my posture, smoothed my dress, and stepped forward. Everyone inside believed they were about to witness the culmination of a story they had already written. They had no idea they were standing at the edge of its ending. The door closed behind me with a sound so soft no one noticed it, but everything changed in that moment. Inside the venue, music was cued, guests were seated, and my fiancé stood at the front wearing the confidence of a man who believed the ending was guaranteed. His family sat in the front row, relaxed, satisfied, already congratulating themselves. They thought this was the last step. They did not realize it was the trigger. I walked forward, calm and steady, and took my place. When the officiant began, I let it continue just long enough for everyone to settle into expectation. Then I spoke. Not loudly, not emotionally. I said one sentence that did not belong in a ceremony, and the room tilted. I stated that the wedding could not proceed under the current legal conditions and that documentation had been filed earlier that morning. Silence followed, thick and immediate. My fiancé turned to me, confused, smiling at first as if this were a joke he had not been warned about. It was not. The coordinator stepped forward, whispering urgently. Phones came out. His mother stood halfway, already demanding explanations. I reached into my bag and handed over copies of documents I had prepared weeks earlier, documents that had been reviewed, notarized, and activated the moment a condition was met. That condition had just been met. Contracts do not care about emotions. They respond to timing. My fiancé's smile faded as he scanned the pages. He did not need to read far. His name was there. So were clauses he had never thought applied to him. Ownership clarified, obligations assigned, protections enforced. Everything he believed he had secured for himself now worked in reverse. The agreement he had signed without concern had activated provisions he never imagined would matter. His father reached for the papers, anger rising fast, but authority dissolves quickly when it has no footing. The language was clear. The signatures were his son's. The timeline was undeniable. There was nothing to argue, only consequences to absorb. My fiancé looked at me then, really looked at me, and I watched understanding replace disbelief. He opened his mouth to speak, but there was nothing left to negotiate. Silence had been my language for months. This was his first time hearing it clearly. The wedding ended without an argument because there was nothing to fight. Staff began quietly dismantling what had just been rendered irrelevant. Guests stood awkwardly, unsure where to look. His mother's face shifted through disbelief and something close to panic as she realized control was gone, not challenged. Gone. I gathered my things and walked back down the aisle alone. No one stopped me. No one could. Outside, the air felt lighter, like pressure released all at once. I did not feel victorious. I felt finished. Later, when the noise had faded and explanations were being demanded elsewhere, I sat by myself and let the stillness settle. What had happened was not sudden. It was simply revealed all at once. People mistake quiet for weakness because it comforts them. They mistake patience for submission because it flatters their sense of dominance. Betrayal follows that pattern more often than anyone wants to admit. I did not destroy anyone. I stepped out of a structure that was designed to collapse on me and let it fall under its own weight. That is the part people misunderstand. Consequence feels like punishment only when you believe you were entitled to immunity. When I think back now, what stays with me is not their faces or the shock or the sudden silence. It is the certainty I felt when the door closed. The understanding that endings do not have to be loud to be final, that power does not need to announce itself to be real. Stories like this happen every day. They just rarely get told from the side that waits, prepares, and walks away intact.